Hello, everyone. I am back with System Synthesis, Chapter 35, titled The Final Round. Ichigo woke up to numb throbbing in his body, and the feeling of his stomach trying to eat itself inside out. Slowly and groggily, he opened his eyes. He groaned and moaned in pain as bright light assaulted his sensitive eyes. Although the pain quickly subsided as a cool shadow fell over his eyes. Slowly, daring to blink his eyes open once more, he looked up and saw red. It took him a few more blinks to realize he was staring at red feathers and register the background sound of someone or some people. Ichigo wasn't sure. Talking. Hawks? Ichigo croaked, throat dry and parched, making him cough. Here, drink this. Hawks, replied Hawks. A hand slipped under Ichigu's back as the hero gently pushed up into a sitting position and held the plastic tumbler full of water in front of him. Ichigo let his eyes wander around as he took the tumbler in his hand. He realized he was sitting on one of the beds in the makeshift infirmary they had made for the sports festival. Directly in front of him was Todoroki, awake and sitting on the edge. The boy noticed his gaze and nodded in return. Ichigo looked further around and saw Recovery Girl with a notepad in her hand. How long was I out? Ichigo asked after taking 3 big sips of water. Barely 10 minutes, Hawks answered. Putting aside the glass tumbler, Ichigo watched as he refilled another glass and walked over to Todoroki's side. You too, little bird. Have some water. Thank you, Todoroki said quietly as he took the tumbler. Did I pass out because I was injured, or? Ichigo asked. Exhaustion, dearie, the recovery girl replied. Technically, you only passed out for a few minutes, but because I used my quirk, you fell back asleep for a little longer. Ichigo sighed. The fight surprisingly hadn't taken a lot of toll on him. His HP and XP were dropped down a level little over half, but it had been fine until the last explosion because of Todoroki's fire. The shock wave from the explosion had sent several huge debris from the wall Cementos had made flying his way. He was sure he had heard a few of his bones break. He guessed the reason he had passed out was because regeneration fixing his wounds had a rapid rate. That, combined with Recovery Girl's quirk, had leached his energy drastically. Speaking of which, here, delivery for you, Hawk said, tossing a bag into his lap. Ichigo blinked down at the unfamiliar backpack and peered into it to find several snacks and a single note with a familiar scrawled saying, just one word, eat. Thanks, Dad. Hawk said I was out for about 10 minutes, Ichigo said for confirmation, fishing out a snack bar before holding out the bag for Todoroki to offer some. Around 15 minutes to be exact, Recovery Girl answered. I expected you to be unconscious for a bit longer, but seems your quirks aid your recovery. Is the next match over? Ichigo asked, turning to Hawks. Yeah, just now. Don't worry, baby bird. You still have a lot of time to get back to full percentage before your next match. Congrats on that, by the way. Thanks, Ichigo smiled and looked back at Todoroki, gasping quietly when he realized being congratulated in front of the boy he won against might be rude. But before he could open his mouth and apologize, a loud explosion boomed somewhere in the stadium. Was that Kachan just now? Ichigo asked, moving towards the edge of the bed. Yep, Hawks replied, switching on the TV fixed up in the corner of the room. It was Katsuki versus Kirishima. Ichigo winced as he saw the already beaten condition the red-haired boy was in. Despite being a quirk that could effectively take on the explosion Katsuki could make, his skin was burned and bruised in several places, and from the way he swayed, it didn't seem like he was going to be standing up anytime soon. I should head out, Isiku said, hopping off the bed. Are you sure? Hawks asked with a concerned frown. Isiku stuffed the last bit of the snack in his mouth while nodding and let out a muffled, "Yep, good luck, Midoriya," Todoroki said plainly just as he was heading out. Isiku paused, eyes widening in shock before it was quickly replaced with a bright smile that made his cheeks color and his eyes curve into crescents. Thanks! Just like he had been expecting, Kirishima didn't last too long. He was strong, yes, but Katsuki was brutal. The blonde didn't ever hold back for anyone, certainly not for people who he knew were strong enough to keep up with him. Go die! Katsuki screamed, combined with a strong explosion that sent Kirishima flying back and out of bounds. Isuku narrowed his eyes. Katsuki wasn't holding back, no, but he was being conservative with his explosions for some reason. During the fight, he didn't rely just on his quirk and actually managed to land some kicks and punches when Kirishima was distracted by the aftermath of his explosions. Itsuka wondered if there was a reason for that, but he didn't have the time to think about it as he headed down for his next match. "Let's have a good match," Itsuku said with a polite bow as he took his position opposite Ida. The bespectacled boy nodded with a determined expression and bowed back. The match was incredibly fast-paced, barely giving either the teams any time to breathe, much less think. One attack after the other, block, counter, attack. The pattern followed over and over again in quick succession. Ida was fast. Isuku fought faster. Dodging the boy's supersonic speed wasn't easy, but bearing a light headache and nausea in exchange of his senses being dialed up to 11 made it possible. Few attacks into the match, and Isuku realized he didn't need to rely on his sight to fight the boy. In fact, his sight lowered his efficiency. "Oh, Itsuku Midoriya has closed his eyes," Hisashi commented with curiosity in his voice. "Has he given up on the fight?" Ida was fast, yes, but his legs were part engine, and they made noise. Kai, it's in effect. Itsuku closed his eyes and relied on his skill-enhanced instincts, focusing his concentration on every other sense apart from sight. Itsuku smelled the smoke emitting from the engine, heard the purr of the motor, felt the heat of the exhaust. All sense is in effect. Situational awareness is in effect. Concentration has increased. Congratulations, you have entered the hyper-focus zone. Left kick to his head. In his mind's eye, the trajectory of the oncoming was clear as day. Itsuku took a half step back and leaned his head back just a little, effectively moving out of the trajectory and causing Ida to topple over with lost momentum. But the loss in balance wasn't enough of an opening. Itsuku took the chance. He grabbed Ida by his uniform and swept his leg to drop the boy off balance completely. And when he did, Itsuku sucked in a deep breath and flipped the boy over his head and slammed him down on the ground. Holy shit. Eraser, Hisashi looked at his friend. "Why are your students so scary?" Ida groaned as he hit the ground, all his breath knocked out of his lungs. To ensure his victory, Itsuku flipped his opponent on his stomach, twisting his arm over his back, and pinned his legs with his own. "Ida," Midnight called, "are you able to move?" Ida struggled under Itsuku's hold, but with fire breathing enhancing Itsuku's physical strength, he was rendered completely immobile. He sighed and slumped his body, aware that he lost. "No," he answered. "I yield." Midnight nodded and then proceeded to announce loudly, "Tenya Ida surrenders! Itsuku Midoriya wins!" Itsuku got off the boy, picking up the glasses that had fallen off at some point, and gave it to him. Ida took it gratefully and said, "Thank you, Midoriya. It was a good match." "It was," Itsuku said with a smile, offering a hand to help the boy. "Are you alright?" "Just a little winded," Ida replied, taking the hand and getting up. "That last move of yours did knock all the air from my lungs. Also, I must say, your reacting time is amazing. No one has been able to dodge my reciprocal blast like that. It wasn't easy, Ichigo replied with a shrug as they got off stage. Took me a lot of training to get to that stage. I sure hope so, Ida said with a laugh. No one is ever born strong and trained. Ichigo shrugged. Maybe, maybe not. Anyway, how's your leg? I noticed the skin around it looks a little irritated from your last move. Ah, reciprocal blast is a new one, so I haven't been able to gain control over it properly. And since I wasn't allowed to use my costume, it kind of hurts. Do you need to go to RG? Ichigo asked, eyeing the red skin around Ida's calf. No, I am fine, Ida assured him. It will go away when my engines cool down. Well, if you say so, Ichigo replied, but do have it checked just in case. Ida smiled, letting out a fond sigh, and nodded, I will. Just as they entered the green room, Ichigo heard a phone buzz. Ida frowned and went over to where his bag was kept and dug it out. Ichigo realized it must have been the blue-haired phone he heard. He wasn't sure what Ida had read or seen, but the boy scowled at the screen like he had seen something he didn't like. Excuse me, Midoriya-kun, he said, tossing away his bag in a hurried manner that was so unlike him. But I'll need to call someone. I don't know how long it'll take. So can you please let the others know? Sure, Ichigo replied as he watched the boy walk out of the room, wondering what had made the boy look so rattled. By the time Ichigo walked back to the bleachers, the next match had already started between Tokoyami and Katsuki. Huh? Ichigo looked around, realizing that Monoma had lost the match between him and Tokoyami. He spotted the blonde far off on the other side, with his classmates surrounding him and patting his back. The match between Tokoyami was an interesting one, because while Dark Shadow was scared of the light emitting from Katsuki's explosion, they were also far too determined to just give up. Ichigo couldn't help but feel a little bad when Katsuki landed an explosion right on Dark Shadow's beak. The sentient quirk howled in pain before jumping back and shrinking in size. Tokoyami, who has come this far with a series of wins thanks to his near invincible quirk, but right now he's completely on defense. He doesn't seem to get in a single attack. Come on, Tokoyami, Mina whined. Ichigo guessed she had been cheering for Tokoyami so far. You were unstoppable against us. Are we missing something? Ichigo heard Yairozu mumble and raised an eyebrow in surprise. They still haven't noticed? Huh, I thought it was pretty obvious. The light from Bakugo's explosion is keeping him at bay. It's a bad matchup, Uvaka said out loud. Ichigo couldn't help but grimace at bad matchup. The phrase be bringing up bad memories from when he was younger. The kid needs to hold out until someone with the right quirk comes, said the hero. Katsuki's red eyes full of fear and terror. Hero standing but not helping. My friend is going to die. He could still turn the match around if Kachan doesn't realize his weakness, Ichigo said with a little more heat in his words than he intended. But for Kachan to not realize even after all the hits is just wishful thinking, Ichigo thought with a frown. Ichigo thought that maybe he was wrong when he saw Dark Shadow wait a second as Katsu's explosion boomed, before reaching out to grab him by his hand and flip him overhead. But the thought died out when he saw Katsuki shift his position mid-air, pressing his hands together. Ichigo narrowed his eyes, dropping the skill that enhanced his senses before it happened. It was really obvious after enough hits, Katsuki said with an arrogant tilt in his voice. Too bad for you, stun gun. A bright light followed by a loud boom and explosion tore through the stadium. What's up with all the explosions and dust? Hisashi whined from the commentator's box. When the dust cleared, it was Tokoyami being pinned down by Katsuki. The blonde's one hand was outstretched, with the explosion still dancing on his palms. The light of it kept Dark Shadow under control. Tokoyami gritted out as Katsuki slowly lowered his hand. Give. The explosion died out just as Katsuki pinched Tokoyami's beak. Ichigo huffed a secret laugh when he saw the blonde tapping the beak once before moving away from the boy. Katsuki always had an odd fascination with birds. Tokoyami surrenders, Hisashi announced loudly into the mic. Looks like a final match is set, people. Isuku Midoriya versus Katsuki Bakugo. We'll take a 10-minute break before the start of the final match, Shota announced. Contestants may use this time to rest or prepare themselves for the final match. Isuku yelped as the mic was turned off. Something tells me that was targeted, Yurichi snickered in his mind. What? No, you're delusional. You might want to rest up if you don't want to get in trouble with your dad, Nana said with a fond chuckle. Isuku pouted as he got up and headed down to the prep room. I'm fine, he whined when he felt a cold touch pat his back. At last we've arrived. The best of the best will be decided here, Hisashi whooped. The final match, Isuku Midoriya versus... Isuku blinked in surprise as he heard a tired sigh, followed by the table being banged like someone was giving drum rolls. But up there could only be one person who could give drum rolls, and that was his dad. Isuku and Katsuki both looked up at the commentator's box in surprise and amusement. Katsuki Bakugo! How long do you think Blondie nagged before he gave in? Katsuki asked with an amused rumble in his voice. Isuku shrugged. Probably the entire 10-minute break. Isuku mostly tuned at what Midnight and Hisashi were saying and focused on looking at his friend's status profile. Name, Bakugo Katsuki. Username, NA. Age, 16 years. Language, Japanese. English. Level, 27. Rank, C. Quick explosion, A. Status, titles, born fighter, B. HP, 1,752 out of 1,800. EP, 3,000 out of 3,800. Statistics, strength, 130. Dexterity, 120. Agility, 140. Speed, 125. Charisma, 82. Intelligence, 176. Ichigo thought with an impressed huff. It never failed to amaze him how much innate talent his friend possessed. How he never stopped improving himself, even if he had a quirk that basically was an all-trump card. Katsuki huffed and got up on the stage. I hope you're ready to lose, Suku. And I hope I don't break your ego too badly, Ichigo said with feigned sympathy in his voice. He smiled sweetly before he cooed. I would hate to see you cry, Katchan. The way Katsuki's eyes twitched and a small explosion popped in his hands brought pure delight to Isuku. Bastard, the blonde growled. Explosion turd, Isuku said, taking his position and doing a courtesy bow. I'm going to kill you, Suku, Katsuki threatened, explosions popping in his hand. Aw, Isuku cooed. That's so cute of you, Kachan. Now start, Midnight declared. Die, Katsuki growled and pounced. Kai is in effect, oral sense is in effect, situational awareness is in effect, hindsight is in effect, insight is in effect, fire breathing is in effect. Nah, Isuku replied, swiftly moving out of the way just a little. He felt the heat of Katsuki's explosion graze past his skin, but flame resistance kept him from flinching and losing his balance. He waited a second before Katsuki was in the optimal position before lifting his leg up to slam it down on the blonde's back. But apparently his friend saw the move coming as he aimed another explosion down to the ground and moved out of the way. Isuku clicked his tongue as his heel slammed on the concrete, causing it to crack. I have to be faster. Katsuki once again lurched forward, hand stretching back as if he was going to punch. Isuku frowned. That was a little too predictive and obvious. Why would Katsuki? His eyes widened as Katsuki slammed his hand on the ground, causing it to explode and the debris to fly everywhere. Itsuku squeezed his eyes on instinct, covering his face with his hand, and jumped back to avoid the bigger pieces of debris. If it wasn't for Kai dialing his senses up to the map, he might have lost the match at that point. Because just as he opened his eyes, he saw Katsuki only a few feet away from it, a wide manacled grin on his face, and his hand ready to slam against his face. Ichigo barely ducked and rolled away in time. When he stood up and looked back, he realized with a cold shiver running down his spine that even if Katsuki's explosion hadn't knocked him unconscious, he sure as hell would have been pushed out of the ring. "What was it you said?" Katsuki asked with a subtle, mocking tone in his voice as he turned around slowly. "Predictable wolf fighting, was it? Same moves?" "Let's see you predict my moves this time," he said and shot forward once more. Ichigo's eyes widened in surprise as he jumped back to create distance. And maybe it was the influence of all the adrenaline junkies. Read, Aizawa Shota, and Takumi Kego in his life that he found himself grinning as he realized what was happening. Kachan is using my knowledge on him against me. Ichigo watched his friend trying to predict his next move. A right hook? No. Ichigo jumped back in a backflip as Katsuki aimed down at his head. "Stop running, Zuko," Katsuki growled. "Seems like our top star is in a bit of a fix," Hisashi commented. Ichigo narrowed his eyes slightly as he jumped back and avoided another attack. His eyes tracked Katsuki's movements like a hawk. "No, he isn't," said Shota tiredly. Ichigo bit the inside of his cheek to keep himself from smiling. His dad knew him a little too well. It's going to ruin his fun if his dad exposed his tactic. However, at the same time, he knew. "What you mean, Racer?" Hisashi asked curiously. "Keep watching," Shota replied with an amused huff. Ichigo hummed in satisfaction. At the same time, he knew his dad wouldn't expose his trick. He was probably enjoying watching the match as well. His true actions were too subtle, and the toxic green glow in his eyes as he tracked Katsuki's movements was far too faint to be noticed by anyone that didn't know what to look for. Analyzing fight pattern: 20%, 30%, 50%, 100%. Translucent white smoke escaped his mouth as his body slowly heated up. "Fight pattern analyzed." Ichigo grinned. "Countermeasures ready." Ichigo planted his feet firmly on the ground, spun around, hooking the curve of his ankle joint on Katsuki's neck and slamming him down. Ichigo huffed as Katsuki barely managed to block his fall with his hands and rolled away from him. His best friend had incredible instincts and talent. It was something he was usually proud of, but right now, it was kind of stressing him out. Ichigo knew he couldn't give Katsuki any moment to attack. His friend's reflexes and movements were faster than those normally of his age. He moved, attacking mostly with his legs to keep his momentum going, and using his hand to keep himself stable mid-air. When Katsuki once again tried the downward attack, Ichigo jumped over him, planting his hand firmly over the blonde's shoulder before he pushed himself upwards into a handstand. He grinned, grateful for his friend's solid core strength and sturdy shoulder. His grip on Katsuki's uniform tightened as he looked down at his friend. The same time the blonde looked up. Shock, panic, and confusion colored his face before using fire breathing to enhance his strength, along with One for All, and dragged his legs down. When Ichigo's feet landed on the ground, Katsuki was up in the air. He then tossed him forward, aiming to throw him out of bounds. But of course, it won't be as so easy when it comes to someone like Katsuki. The blonde used his explosion to maneuver himself mid-air. Ichigo furrowed his brows in slight confusion as Katsuki's palm slowly lit up instead of the usual quick explosion. "Howland, sir?" he heard his friend murmur and then yell, "Impact!" Ichigo watched with a mix of fascination and panic as his friend used his explosion to propel himself forward like a torpedo and create a miniature tornado. The twisting movement allowing enough air to fuel his explosions. Ichigo pushed one foot back, lowering his center of gravity as he tried to figure out how he was supposed to avoid something like that. Even as he waited until the last second before jumping to the side to avoid the explosion, it wasn't enough as he was thrown back from the impact of the explosion against the ground. He groaned and grunted as he hit and rolled off the ground like a rag doll. The bright white line of the border barely caught his sight and dug his fingers into the cement to kill his momentum. "Don't you dare look down on me, Asuku," Katsuki threatened, red eyes ablaze with fury. "I'm not," Isuku groaned as he stood up. "Then fight me with your everything," Katsuki snapped. Isuku scrunched his face from both pain and confusion. He was giving his everything at the moment. He was using all his heavy-duty skills at the same time to tackle his friend. So what was he on about? Oh. Itsuki realized why his friend was thinking he wasn't giving his everything. Katsuki wanted him to fight the way he had fought the Nomu. Only he couldn't. He had no control over entering that particular zone he had achieved that day. He had tried so hard to achieve something even close, but entering the hyper-focus zone was the maximum he could achieve. Whatever that had been was out of his control. He couldn't enter that state without an unnatural amount of hysteria and rage clouding his mind. Moreover, the backlash from it had been huge. It's not something Asuku could afford at the moment. He didn't even know how to use Dragon's domain yet. "I am," Isugu said through his gritted teeth. The smoke escaping his mouth slowly condensed before bursting toxic green flames. Katsuki grinned dangerously as he watched the flames envelop his friend. Good. Within a split second, Isugu had moved from the edge and towards the center where the debris had collected. One hard slam on the ground sent them flying upwards. Katsuki geared up to tackle the oncoming attack, explosions popping on his palm. Isuku let his fire reach out and cover the debris before he aimed them at his friend. Katsuki cussed, using his explosion to destroy the makeshift weapons. But Isuku was much faster, aiming them at twice the speed Katsuki could destroy them. The blonde exploded. One particularly big debris kicked his way, but the smaller parts of it hit him hard on his head, knocking him down. He stood up just as quickly as he fell, face contorted in pure rage. Bright light emitted from his closed fist, smoke pouring out of his hands in waves. The smell of banana filled the air as his sweat collected into creases of his palm. Isuku's flame exploded around him, burning brighter and stronger, enshrouding him in an armor of flame. "Not again," Cementos whispered hurriedly under his breath as he got off his seat and rushed in to interrupt. But just like the last time, the walls of cement didn't stand a chance. They exploded and shattered into pieces. Both the fighters completely unfettered by the flying debris and entirely focused on each other. The heat from Katsuki's palm melted off some of the debris he blocked, while the ones aimed at Isuku exploded into dust the moment they flamed their armor. Collided with Katsuki's palm, the ground shook. A blinding white light was first seen before an explosion, twice the power and size as the one before it blasted across the stadium. Midnight and Cementos were sent flying back, slamming against the walls. In the bleachers, the viewers ducked for cover, a huge wave of heat and air washing over them. destroying the benches. Some of the camera bots on the ground close to the duel, too, exploded on the spot. Glasses from the screens and the commentator's box exploded into pieces. It took several seconds before everything went quiet, and slowly, one by one, the audience dared to get out of their hiding spots. Up in the commentator's box, Shelter was already up, squinting his eyes as he scanned the ground to see who remained standing, or who remained within the borders. That is, if there was anything left of a border. Hisashi followed him a few seconds later, peeking his head over the console table before he stood up. "Wowza, that was terrifying!" he exclaimed into the mic. "But after an explosion like that, who remained standing?" "Are Midnight and Cementos okay down there?" Shoto murmured. It took several more seconds for the smoke to disappear, and when it did, in the middle of everything stood Itsuki Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo. Down on the ground, Midnight coughed and groaned as she slowly peeled herself off the ground. She cradled her arm to her chest, sure that it was broken. Slowly she stood up and limped closer to the middle to assess the situation. For a few seconds of pin-drop silence, the two teams stood facing each other, panting and huffing, but still in stance and ready to attack. But then, suddenly, Katsuki swayed. Katsuki swayed side to side before his eyes rolled back and he dropped on the ground. Panting and heaving, bloodied and wounded, the Isuku stood victorious over Katsuki Bakugo. His eyes glowed like the flame around him, green hair wild like the flames. The top of his gym clothes was all destroyed, revealing angry red burns on his chest and arms, broken walls and debris surrounding him, but his green flame surrounding him like a halo as he stared down at his fallen opponent. It looked like a scene straight out of a movie, like some gladiator standing over their enemy. "Why does that look familiar?" Hisashi mumbled, blonde eyebrows furrowing together in confusion as he felt a shiver rack his body. A strong sense of deja vu washed over him. Katsuki was on the floor, unconscious. The outcome was clear as day. "The winner is Itsuki Midoriya," Midnight announced. Itsuki let out a breath of relief as the winner was declared, and the crowd exploded into a loud frenzy of cheers and shouting. He dropped to his knees, chest rising and falling, as his lungs gasped for more air. There wasn't a part of his body that didn't ache. I'm just gonna," he breathed out, falling next to Katsuki on his back, "take a nap here." The shouts of the crowd and the referees blurred out into a white noise as his vision blurred. Itsuki wasn't injured, but the last attack had leached far too much of his energy and health. He probably should go to the infirmary, but "good night," he murmured before unconsciousness pulled him under. Alright, that is the end of this chapter. I hope you guys enjoyed. Bye bye.